Hello, everyone. This is Susan Vermeer-Lopez. I'm a lead consultant here at REL Central at McREL, and I want to get us started right on time and take just a minute today to welcome you to our webinar called Turning Around Low-Performing Schools, How ESAs and SEAs Can Help Low-Performing School and Districts. We have about 600 people registered for today's webinar from coast to coast and even across the world in Australia. And I think that shows that we have not only some incredible partners, but also a really great topic and something to offer to all of you today as part of our conversation and what we have to present on this issue that's important to all of us. An event that reaches 600 people requires some planning and collaboration, and I'd like to first thank the staff and leadership at our 9 sister labs across the country for their help to get this partner with us in this webinar and recruit panelists and participants, as you'll hear from later. I'd like to send a special thank you to REL Midwest. This was kind of an initial partnership and conversation between us at REL Central and REL Midwest, and REL Midwest is also providing the webinar platform for our event today. And also a special thanks to Heather Hoke here at REL Central, who has done most of the work and led the planning for this event. And finally, I'd like to thank Brian Talbot, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Educational Service Agencies, and Peter Young, the CFO at AESA, for their assistance in planning this event, including recruiting panelists and participants as well. Just a quick overview of our agenda for today. You'll hear from me as far as opening comments and from Brian as well to welcome you. We'll then turn it over to Dr. Sam Redding, who's the Executive Director at the Center on Innovation and Improvement, who will be our speaker today. And he will also introduce to you our panelists. We have 6 panelists today from across the country who have some experience and resources to share with you about what they've been able to do with turning around low-performing schools. At the end of our session today, we will have some time for questions and answers and a quick poll. You'll see at the bottom of your screen you have the opportunity to submit questions starting now and throughout the webinar, so we would certainly encourage you to do that. Before I pass this off to Brian, though, I'd like to take just a minute to tell you about the Regional Education Laboratory Program and its mission. You'll see on the slide that the lab program covers the entire country, and you probably already know quite a bit and have hopefully used the resources that are offered by the REL program for your region. Each REL region serves a set of states. Some of the work that we do is around assessing regional needs and conducting short-term research projects. And if you look on our website, you'll see short-term projects and issues that relate to standards, teacher effectiveness, rural education, measuring student engagement, evaluations of high school career academies. Those are just an example of some of the hundreds of studies that have been done by RELs across the country that might be useful to you and hopefully that you've had a chance to look at in the past. RELs also are responsible for conducting randomized controlled field studies to often determine the effectiveness of interventions, and as many of the RELs are finishing these studies, you'll see quite a few announcements and resources related to those studies that will be useful to you, hopefully, in your work as well. We participate in cross-laboratory initiatives. This is a terrific example of all the labs coming together and working together to offer opportunities to connect research to practice, and then disseminate research findings and related information, as I mentioned. And you'll see on the next slide as our mission pops up. It's hopefully similar to what I just said, serving the educational needs of each designated region, using applied research development, dissemination, and also training and technical assistance. Part of this mission, and really at the core of this mission, is to bridge the gap between research and practice, which is the agenda that we have for today. Today we're going to talk about a specific practice guide around turning around low-performing schools. It's part of a series of 14 IES practice guides that are part of a whole set of resources offered on the What Works Clearinghouse and provide practical recommendations for educators, which I hope you'll find today, including strategies for overcoming roadblocks. You'll see us also as we push out a poll later on that some of the topics that are on those practice guides are some things that we might be able to offer to you as well in the future. So hopefully you'll let us know what might be most helpful to you. This exciting opportunity today brings the REL program together with AESA to provide assistance to educational service agencies and state education agencies as you all work together to assist low-performing schools. So with that, I hope that this is a useful webinar to you, and I'd like to thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian Talbot, again, who's the Executive Director of AESA, to add his welcome and kick off the webinar.
Thank you, Susan. You and your staff have provided outstanding leadership in designing this special event, and I want to add my welcome to everyone. I am so excited about the potential of this webinar. The Association of Educational Service Agencies and its 553 member ESAs in 45 states are committed to assisting state departments of education and local school districts to improve student learning. Those of you on today's webinar know our member ESAs by a variety of names depending upon what your state constitution or legislature named them when they were created. For example, County Offices of Education, BOCES, Intermediate Units, Educational Service Districts, Service Cooperatives, Area Education Agency, and the list goes on. Turning around chronically low-performing schools is a cornerstone effort of the United States Department of Education. AESA and the ESAs support the state and local efforts in this initiative. In addition, the Regional Educational Laboratory System supports all of us with research and best practices. As evidenced by the number of participants attending this webinar, we need grassroots support to accomplish the task of turning around low-performing schools. To carry out this important work, we need field experts on the ground that can reach out to all schools. Our 553 educational service agencies are best positioned to lead and implement these school improvement initiatives. As a central mission of the ESAs is providing service to local districts, ranging from professional development to a presence in the classroom. It is the right thing to do for the districts and students we serve. ESAs are and will continue to provide the ground support for turning around low-performing schools. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sam Redding, a national leader in school improvement. He is the director of the Center on Innovation and Improvement. Dr. Redding will talk about the center's work and successful ESA school improvement programs from around the country. Dr. Redding? Dr. Redding?
Hello. Sorry about that. I was muted. Are you hearing me now? Also another little technical issue. I'm getting a connecting please stand by message and not seeing the correct slide. If somebody wants to move the slides for me, that would be fine. Or anyone?
Well, Dr. Redding, I'll do that over here.
Okay.
So just
I'm not seeing them either, so we'll kind of have to stay in sync, I guess. The one I see now still says welcome.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure why that is.
I'm not either. It was working fine before. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
You want me to try to re-enter real quick? Or?
No, I think maybe just go ahead and we'll.
Okay. I've got the hard copy here, so I will speak from it, and you can try to stay one ahead of me. How's that?
I will. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. First of all, let me give a little context for this practice guide and how it came about and what the Institute for Education Sciences does with its practice guides. Many of you may use the practice guides that come out of IES or the Doing What Works clearinghouse, and realized that the genesis was a few years ago, and I think many of us in the field of education were trying hard to do what we were asked to do, and that's to operate according to research, but we were finding that sometimes the research cabinet was a bit bare, and we were not getting the guidance we thought we needed for practical application. And so in response to that, IES and the Department of Education developed the the practice guide series that are all based on usually IES-sponsored research through their laboratories or through other vehicles, and have put this out as practical guidance in the form of practice guides and a very rich website called Doing What Works. It has video interviews and all that. If you're not familiar with it, take a look at it, and there are a variety of topics there. So in 2007, I was asked to be a member of a 6-member panel to take a look at school turnaround research and see if we could bring to the field some practical guidance on how schools turn around. And so the panel members, Rebecca Herman, Priscilla Dawson, Thomas D. J. Green, Rebecca Maynard, and myself represented a kind of a mixed group of some real hardcore researchers, some practitioners, one principal who had actually turned a school around, and some of those that kind of tread the waters between research and practice and trying to bring research to practice. And Marlene Darwin at the American Institutes for Research, who was the staff person working with us. And so what we would do as a panel, we would meet, carry on discussions, define some parameters for research we would like to look at. Marlene would pull up the research, we would read it, we would try to winnow from all of that research something we could hang our hats on in terms of what causes a school to turn around, what can we learn about this process. The disappointing conclusion on the front end was that there was very little research at that time in the world of education. And it might be good for us to all, right now in the world today, turnaround is a very common term, and particularly since Secretary Duncan's emphasis on turning around the bottom 5% of schools on performance, the school improvement grants. We have heard the term turnaround quite a bit the last couple of years. In 2007, when we began, it was not so common, and mostly we were looking at cross-sector analysis in the world of business or in other kinds of public entities that had gone through a significant turnaround. As far as the panel, we decided that we would only look at cross-sector evidence if we could also confirm it within the field of education. So that's a rule we applied. We found 10 case studies with 35 schools, 21 elementary, 8 middle, and 6 high schools that we thought we could rely upon for drawing our conclusions to make recommendations about turnaround. Now, as IES constructs these panels and practice guides, we had to determine the level of the evidence, and in all cases, these were classified as low evidence, which does not mean that it is not information that we might base decisions upon. It means simply this. There had been no real randomized controlled field studies of turnaround where someone intentionally on the front end said we're going to apply these strategies in school A and not in the control school B, and we are going to see if we can produce a turnaround. There was nothing like that. Typically what turnaround studies were retrospective case studies in which a school had turnaround, and then a researcher would say, I'm going to go in and see if I can understand how that happened. And so through a case study methodology, the turnaround was studied. And so that's what we found. We found case studies which are low evidence in terms of the quality of the research design, but still it was the evidence that we had to go on. Okay, so what I want to do today in looking at the turnaround era, which I would say we are now well into this turnaround era, but it actually began about the time of this practice guide, and talk a little bit about what's happened over those few years before we jump to the recommendations. I'm now on the slide that says before the practice guide, which has a lovely picture of a bird in flight. And at the time we began looking at turnaround research, as a panel we felt we were a little bit like scientists who were combing the swamps in Arkansas trying to find evidence of an ivory-billed woodpecker. You may have read a few years ago or seen on 60 Minutes that someone thought they saw an ivory-billed woodpecker in a swamp in Arkansas, and yet we had assumed that species had been extinct for 40 or 50 years. And there was great excitement over the possibility that it was still a living species, and so scientists converged on the area. It's great speculation and interest in it. And we felt a little bit about that, about turnaround. Everyone was very excited to know how can we turn schools around. That would be a great interest. But when we waded through the swamps of research, we were not finding much to hang our hats on. So that was before the practice guide. I think also at the time of the practice guides, one of the reasons that IES and the U.S. Department of Education said we still need something to get us started looking at this topic was because of disappointment over restructuring. And so now the slide I have says restructuring. And to remember where that term came from, we borrowed it in education from the world of business, where when a business was at the point of bankruptcy, it was often taken into bankruptcy court and restructured, meaning the very nature of the business was changed, the way it made decisions was changed. And this is what we were attempting to do with schools after they had not made adequate yearly progress for a number of years. They entered restructuring. And under No Child Left Behind, that meant that the state could take the school over, which almost never happened. That meant that under NCLB, the district could execute something like a turnaround, and at that time, that term mostly meant you get a new principal and you try some other significant changes in curriculum instruction. The district could also close the school and reopen as a charter school or contract to an education management organization. Now, these are very much like the options now available for school improvement grants, with one exception, and that is that under restructuring there was a fifth option that we called other. And in the early studies by the Center for Education Policy, and I believe that included about 5,000 of the first schools that went through restructuring, CEP found that in 96% of the cases the districts were selecting other, which is the mildest attempt at restructuring, and that the results were very unimpressive in terms of schools actually getting on track and making adequate progress after having gone through this restructuring. So that was a lot of the reason why IES convened a panel and said, how would we do this right? What do we need to know about how a school makes dramatic and significant improvement over a short period of time? So now we'll go to the practice guide itself. And I'm on the slide that says 4 recommended practices. So the conclusions we drew as a panel after looking at the research and having discussions and drawing from our own experiences, the recommendations were that a turnaround seems to be produced by 4 things. You see the recommendations here. An early signaling of the need for dramatic change. Sometimes we talk about a catalytic event that this then causes a community of people to realize they need to go in a new direction, and often that is expressed by a change in leadership. The cross-sector evidence for outside the world of education showed that in successful turnarounds, about 70% of the time the leadership changed at the top. We were finding some parallel in education. The second recommendation, maintain a consistent focus on improving instruction. Ultimately, change in instruction seemed to be what mattered most. Thirdly, the idea of quick wins, and that is a term that certainly entered our vocabulary in recent years. And as we will discuss in a minute, quick wins, the reason for that is to alter the expectations of the people working in the school, to change a mindset of defeatism, and to open people's minds and eyes to the possibility that constructive change can happen here. Quick wins do not themselves produce improved student learning. Quick wins position the people in the school to expect more of themselves and of their school. And fourthly, build a committed staff. meaning it's the human capital issue. And I think what we see now from school improvement grants and other messages that we get from the U.S. Department of Education, that they very much see that human capital as a big part of the equation and a major part of the solution in attempting school turnaround, so building a committed staff. The one thing we wanted to be sure to point out was the fact that turnarounds do not occur because someone chooses one of the four strategies or two of the four or three, but what we found, it was an interplay among all four of these recommended practices that they all are happening and that they do have a relationship one to another. Okay, let's look at recommended practice number 1, signal the need for dramatic change with strong leadership. I think it's fair at this time to say that in 2007, when we were approaching the idea of turnaround, we were not looking at situations where you simply replace all the staff, we were primarily saying, how do you take the school as it is and change the conditions in ways that get dramatic results? So the one exception to that was probably that we did recommend that there was a strong indication that the central leader, in this case the principal, that in most cases it was best that principal be replaced. We just found that it's very difficult for a principal who has been in place for a while to convince the school and the people within that school community and staff that now I really mean it, things are going to change. No more business as usual. It was just hard to make that case. In some instances that could happen depending upon that person. But one way to signal change was with new leadership. But that wasn't the end of it. Simply replacing a principal was not what was required. Instead, it meant that typically the superintendent, the school board, community leaders, a lot of people had to show that they were on the same bandwagon, that they got it now, that they realized that there was a need for change, and that was expressed by dramatic change in leadership practices and a strong and consistent message. I'm now on the slide that says new versus continuing principle. We thought it was fair to at least point out that there are sometimes advantages to a principal who's in place remaining. I think that's probably particularly true if they have not been there for long and maybe have already begun some type of reform efforts. But the advantages for a continuing principal is they don't have a learning curve. They already understand the school. Sometimes they have positive relationships to build from. But overall, the evidence pointed toward typically for the need for new leadership. We looked then at the leadership practices that were exhibited by these principals, and we pointed to 3. One was a sharing of responsibility. Some of these seem almost contrary, but they're not. I think it's a dynamic where the same principal is both able to be strong and focused and provide direction and also good at sharing leadership and building leadership capacity within that building. We saw a strong use of lead teachers and leadership teams and instructional teams. We also found that these principals were very adept at instruction. Instruction was a strong suit, not only a strong suit, but was something that they devoted considerable time to. I think there were some studies that indicated that these principals spent at least half of their time focusing directly on instruction. So those are the types of practices that we saw that constituted leadership in a turnaround situation. And at this point, it's easy to say that's just good management. And what's unique about this being a turnaround leadership practice? And probably the difference is the signaling a departure at a point in time and a dramatic change that says this may not have been the leadership practices in the past. It will be in the future. The principals in these situations in were very adept at the political side of leadership in the sense of getting people on board, of having, so we say, having coffee with the right folks, having the right conversations, working with school boards, community leaders, parent leaders, key teachers, and so forth. So a lot of this signaling change came not so much with grand public announcements, but a lot of behind-the-scenes work also with the right people. Let's move to the recommended practice number 2, maintain a consistent focus on improving instruction. Typically when I present this material, I would skip to and come back to it for this reason. Recommendation 1, signaling change with strong leadership, or recommendations 3 and 4, which have to do with quick wins and committed staff, all are stage setters, the things you have to do first so that you can improve instruction. But the improved results in student learning have to include instruction. So again, the first, third, and fourth recommendation are stage setters. It ultimately has to lead to improved instruction. And in all of these schools in the case studies, there is a consistent focus on improved instruction. So we might ask what that means. And I'm now down to the slide that says using data to improve instruction. We dug a little deeper on this one because this is too obvious an answer, the using data, because we've been asking school people to use data for many years. Many think they do. But we found in these schools data was used at 3 distinct levels. That at the school level, a management team or something like this was looking at overall school data and making decisions about curriculum, about programs, about student placement, about hiring. A lot of school level decisions made looking at school level data. But also in this school, there seemed to be a use of data by teacher teams. And this did not only mean looking at student outcome data, it also meant having information about instructional strategies, about materials, about what were the inputs instructionally that were creating the results in student outcomes, so that the teacher teams and individual teachers were looking at both sides of that data equation, and that also individual teachers were looking at very current, often teacher-created, formative assessment at a student level to differentiate instruction and to bring the right types of learning activities to bear for each individual student. So there was a use of data at 3 levels. There was use of not only student outcome data, but information about instructional strategies and materials and the inputs that were creating the student outcomes. And there was a use of data to take instruction to the individual student level. You can see that this recommendation relates to the first one in the leadership style. The sharing of leadership meant that teams were often present, that instructional teams of teachers were very disciplined. There were expectations for work products, that they had systematic processes for looking at student data, for examining instructional strategies, for looking at materials, for developing materials and instructional strategies and activities together, reviewing curriculum. This was very disciplined work on the part of the instructional teams in these situations. Okay, at this point, while I try to see if I can get back online and hope that everyone is still with us there, I will turn this over to Damon Douglas of the Collaborative for Educational Services in Northampton, Massachusetts, for some ongoing discussion. Damon?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, United States, and good morning, Australia. So I'm speaking from the Collaborative for Educational Services, and I am in Western Massachusetts. We're an education service agency. We work to create systems and programs that build the capacity of districts to serve the most vulnerable youth and to close achievement gaps. So here in Western Mass, we're home to several urban districts and then a multitude of rural districts, some of them actually have fewer than 1,000 students in grades K through 12. I know that's kind of an anomaly, but that's the way it's done in a lot of the Northeast here. I'm going to focus on the practice guide recommendation number 2, that one that was in red. And that's what a lot of my work surrounds. So to improve instruction, we put together and facilitate learning teams that focus on content and pedagogy within and among districts. So I'm going to speak about 2 of those. The first one was sponsored by a state grant. We were working with middle school teachers from 4 different districts. And looking at the student test scores from those 4 districts, we found identified low performance with certain math skills. So our professional development, our training focused on that content, as well as the use of formative assessments to monitor student learning in the math classrooms and then to plan interventions. So teachers were able to travel to each other's classrooms, observe, describe practices they saw as improved. But the great part about being able to run this interdistrict was that the interaction didn't stop there. The experience of visiting out-of-district schools and classrooms inspired questions about math programs, about schedules, and interventions in place. So that's one learning team that we've been working with. The other one I wanted to talk about is with a teacher team in Ware, Massachusetts. And looking at their student test data, they found their students were struggling with writing responses to reading passages. And so working with them, we created graphic organizers to support student writing. And then teacher-developed student-friendly scoring rubrics. And now the teachers are able to examine the student work to fine-tune the instruction, so both classroom-based and small group instruction. So they're able to use that student work to figure out what's needed. And this seems to align well with what Dr. Redding was presenting from the practice guide. So one question that often comes up is how do we convene these groups? And we're using at least 3 ways. One is, which I find works best, is if we can make use of common planning time, team times, within the district's existing schedules. Often we have to be a little more creative and find time outside of school. We have some stipends built into grants, and sometimes we have money in the grants for substitutes, so teachers can meet during the school day and observe each other. And that brings up our relationship with our state education agency. It's called the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education here in Massachusetts. And over the past 15 or 20 years, we've developed a pretty strong working relationship with them. And that role has really been strengthened by geography. So they are in the eastern part of the state, in the Boston area. We're in the western. And they've only had one office for a while now. So it's been difficult for small western districts to access state resources. And we've demonstrated an ability to make those resources available to rural districts. So the state education agency, the DESE, continues to look to us for that. Now, and just in the past year or 2, they've created the District and School Assistance Center to support low-performing districts statewide. And with support from this center, we're actually bringing training now. So we're collaborating with them. We're bringing training in data analysis and classroom instruction to the town of Orange, Massachusetts. And then another new program coming from the state is the Readiness Center. And we're a lead partner in this effort. We're collaborating with the state education agency and higher education to plan a regional approach to professional development. So the first step will deliver training to all the districts about how the state's incorporating the Common Core state standards into our own state frameworks. So in just a few minutes, I've explained how our agency, the Collaborative for Educational Services, works with low-performing schools and how we're collaborating with our state education agency to get that work done. So I wanted to thank people who are joining us today in Australia and the U.S., and it's now my pleasure to introduce Chris Donnelly from the Grant Wood AEA in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Hi, Damon. Thank you very much for your remarks, and welcome everyone to the webinar. Not unlike Damon, our agency provides support to rural and urban schools in our 7-county area. We provide support to 32 districts. There are 9 area education agencies across the state of Iowa. So each school district has the opportunity to interact with an area education agency. And while we provide support for many different areas of important work in schools, our primary focus really is to assess schools and maintaining that consistent focus on instruction. And so we do provide support to schools to help them align their content, to know and understand what effective instruction is, and support for implementing effective instruction, and also most recently to help districts begin to develop a multi-tiered assessment system, looking not only at summative measures of assessment, but also helping them with those formative classroom-based levels of assessment for making sure that we're adjusting instruction to meet the needs of all students. In Iowa, we deploy our services at the AEA to districts based on their instructional goals, which are developed using the data from their students as well as what's occurring in the schools, not unlike what Dr. Redding spoke to with respect to implementation of strategies and the other resources. So within our AEA, we have developed 3 particular pilots that we are working with low-performing schools on. Our first one is similar to Damon's in that it's a math pilot, and we have been working with schools that have significant gaps in their math curriculum, particularly gaps in supporting students that are struggling in mathematics. It's a math intervention that is aligned with the core instruction that's occurring. It is an intervention program that does help students with the cognitive thinking and concept development in mathematics. And the teachers using this particular program are co-teaching and co-planning with our math consultants. So we're really providing that job-embedded support to teachers as they are working directly with students. A second particular program that we've developed is a partnership between our AEA and our State Department of Education. This program is provided to special education teachers that are needing to accelerate the reading achievement of students. And in particular, our state is attempting to work toward closing that achievement gap. So our consultants are partnering with consultants from the Iowa Department of Education to work in pilot sites with teachers, teachers that work with students on IEPs, to make sure that those teachers have support for developing research-based instruction, that they know what the high-impact reading skills are that students need to be successful, and that they are using data to monitor student learning and adjusting instruction based on that student learning. The third program that we developed, again, is another partnership, but this is with some reading experts out of the University of Texas at Austin. And this particular program really is a school-wide program helping the building leader know and understand the role of a continuum of literacy instruction and where do all of the teachers in the building fit into that instruction so it's cohesive and focused particularly on students who are struggling. And as a result of that pilot, we as an agency have developed our knowledge and skills around how to assist schools in developing those collaborative teams. How do you use formative data for instructional planning? And we have developed some protocol to help building leaders use when they're in observing teachers' instruction in the area of reading. So we have looked particularly in our AEA at those 3 programs targeted in general for students that are struggling. But to build on the recommendation that Dr. Redding spoke to, the first recommendation around leadership support, we also are working with our districts to build leadership teams so that there is distributive leadership in a school and the building principal isn't on his or her own to maintain that focus on instruction. And our leadership team support is really something that the AEAs across the state are working collectively on as our districts have the opportunity to implement what we're calling the Iowa Core. So that is a statewide effort partnering with our Department of Ed as well as with the other AEAs. so in general, you can tell that we are working very similarly to the work that Damon described in Massachusetts, and really trying to concentrate our efforts and deploy our staff more effectively to provide support to those low-performing schools. So I want to thank all of you for your hard work and your interest. It's really through the partnership of all of us that we can realize the change that we need to be making in some of the schools in our country. And at this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to Linda Hippert of the Allegheny Intermediate Unit Number 3 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what the Allegheny Intermediate Unit is doing to perhaps focus on that consistently improving instruction in our schools. The Allegheny Intermediate Unit is an educational service agency. It is the liaison between the Pennsylvania Department of Education and, in our case, the 42 suburban school districts that surround the city of Pittsburgh. The city of Pittsburgh does have its own educational service agency. So we encompass about 123,000 students, K-12, and an additional 5,000 preschool-age children. Uniquely, our school districts include some of the very wealthiest that are in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the highest performing, and also some of the poorest and lowest performing districts. Also, somewhat unique to our intermediate unit is that we have been invited by and have entered into a governmental agreement with the Pennsylvania Department of Education to manage one of those lowest performing districts that is in Allegheny County. And about 4 years ago, we began that responsibility, taking it over and working with the Commonwealth due to both the economic and academic deficiencies of that school district. And in addition to that role, which we continue to carry on, we also assisted in transitioning their high school students to 2 neighboring schools. So all as a part of school improvement and helping them to get better, always looking at the needs of the children. So because of our role as an educational service agency and to provide service to school districts, when asked of these 4 recommendations, probably what is most important to us, and that is maintaining a consistent focus on improving instruction. As part of that, in Pennsylvania, districts are required to submit school improvement plans to the state when there are deficiencies in their AYP status, and schools that are in School Improvement 1 and Corrective Action 1 are actually required to submit their plans to the intermediate unit for review. And we sign an assurance of quality prior to their submission to the Department of Education. So we really have a very positive and unique partnership where we can assist. There are 29 intermediate units serving the 500 school districts, and then we also serve the charter schools and non-public schools as well. So based upon our review and feedback that we give schools on their improvement plans, they're required to make changes, and then if they're in any other phase other than School Improvement 1 and Corrective Action 1, we're really not required to review the plans, but certainly that is a service that we provide to our schools based upon those requests. Of our 42 school districts, we probably work with 10 to 12 of them each year to develop their school improvement plans and or address areas that they believe are important and that we can help them to identify are important. Our staff members from our Department of Teaching and Learning are trained in all of the requirements of school improvement, including data analysis, root cause analysis, developments of plans, and implementation of monitoring. In order for a school district to complete the plan, they really have to understand the components, which are very closely related to the recommendations on having that consistent focus on improving instruction. So I think that's very, very positive. It includes data analysis, identification of root causes. All of the schools that are sanctioned are actually participating in professional development activities that we are offering here in our intermediate unit. And we very much focus on using data to make both curricular changes and instructional changes, because we know if the appropriate curriculum is not in place first, then it leaves little chance for the teachers to be providing the appropriate instruction in order for the results to change in the district. So the districts here in Pennsylvania analyze the state testing data. That is one form of data that they have. And we go through that with them as to how to break it down to the very minute portions and how that relates to the standards and the instruction provided in their classroom. We also have value-added data, and yesterday, for the first time, that value-added data was released publicly. So we will very soon be getting a lot of questions about that, as well as schools throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We also focus very much on finding the root cause of the poor achievement. Oftentimes that is very difficult for districts that, they're working hard and teachers are working hard and they're putting a lot of time in, but what is the real cause of the poor performance or the results, particularly on state assessment tests that they are seeing? We provide on-site support for development of the plan. We also, as I mentioned, have meetings here at the intermediate unit. And we have come to learn that the best results come about when there is a system-wide process that allows them to focus on continuous improvement and getting better. Another thing that we do as an educational service agency is serve on the state leadership teams and committees so that we are constantly ourselves getting better at what we're doing, helping the state to revise the process and revise the tools that are being used. As we talk about identifying professional development, we look at specific action sequences that the schools need to take in order to, again, look at best practices, trying to attain the results that they desire. And as a result of that, we are actually placed in their school improvement plans as providers so that the professional development is ongoing, that they're continuously assessing results and then looking to see whether or not those incremental changes are having a positive effect on the results that they hope to achieve. We have been asked to review, we write curriculum, we train on differentiation and co-teaching, we actually facilitate data team meetings, and we help districts to analyze specific data sources. And depending on the reasons of schools in school improvement, we also might be asked to provide specific content and professional development in reading and mathematics. We have a very robust Reading Achievement Center here at the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, which is used by a large number of our districts, not just those in school improvement. And they have seen tremendous results and then have been able to share those results with others. We also collaborate with administrators. We review programs that are being implemented and look at assessing and curtailing programs that are really not effective. We know in these budget crises that's something that we're going to have to continue to do, to look at what is working, what isn't working, and where do we need to direct our resources, which is also a very important role that we play. We know that quick school improvement is good and getting some positive results, but really it's a long-term solution and it's changing the culture and the environment. We also do curriculum audits for the schools, knowing that looking at, as I mentioned prior, that what the schools are teaching is appropriate, and we also audit not only curriculum but behavior, discipline, programming, and special education as well. In summary, I get what I spoke of generally is intensified when we were called upon to actually manage a low-performing school, low-performing academically, and also, I believe, the poorest school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it is indeed quite a challenge to do that, because in addition to focusing on strong leadership, recommendation 1, which was important, a new principal was brought into the school, but we are working with teachers who are willing to learn, but in many cases have been deprived of good professional development for many years. So that process of leading to good quality instruction and focusing on that is quite a challenge. It's very rewarding, however, and having been a superintendent for 13 years as well as a principal in my role now as an executive director, I see the educational service agencies as being that wonderful liaison to the districts that enables us to provide them with high-quality programs and services that will enable them to focus on improving their instruction. At times, though, it goes back to the school and its leadership, because we are not, even when we're managing the school district, ultimately the board is responsible for what is actually happening there. So we cannot directly demand that what we suggest is being done. And I think we all know that you can't micromanage, but it is important that we offer the assistance, we offer the professional development, we offer what works based on the research, and then it is up to that individual school to carry that out. On a positive note, in many of our schools that we've worked with, we've seen very, very positive student achievement results, and that's the great reward when we know that what we are doing is benefiting the children. So it's indeed an honor for us to work with our schools, and we appreciate the great research that has been done that is validating much of the work that we are doing across the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania. So thank you. And at this time, I would like to turn the program back over to Dr. Redding.
And this time I even remembered to unmute. So thank you very much, Damon and Chris and Linda, all three. And it's really great in the middle of this to stop and listen to some real practical applications, all this, and to hear how it's playing out in districts and schools. The one thing that it's probably worth noting at this point is that in 2007, when we began this, there was no real firm definition of what constitutes a turnaround of a chronically low-performing school. And had we applied a realistic or a valid definition, we would probably had no research to look at rather than just a little. So we went with a fairly modest definition that to begin with, to define chronically low performing, the school had to have at least 20% of its students not proficient over a period of 3 or more years. Now, that is a very modest definition compared to what we are looking at now, where turnaround is being defined as for the bottom 5%. And I think it's a very important distinction, because if we muddy the water between the kind of dramatic interventions that are necessary to actually get rapid improvement in a chronically low-performing school, if we muddy the water between that and what is good school operations or what is general school improvement practice, continuous improvement, we may miss a point here. Because in 2007 we didn't have the research base, and because we didn't want to stick our necks out too far on what we wanted to recommend, we kind of took a do no harm approach and said mostly let's stick with recommendations that are probably going to be good in any situation, and we hope that they will also contribute to a turnaround. The good news is, because of school improvement grants, because of a lot of emphasis on what do we do with the bottom 5%, the ones in real need of turnaround the last few years, there's now emerging a research base, and there will be even more over the coming few years, where we will have a lot more evidence to hang our hats on. But I thought at this point I'd stop to reiterate that if we are talking about turnaround as opposed to school improvement, we are talking about looking at the very low end of schools, and we're talking about interventions that will get a significant increase in student learning in, as we defined it, less than 3 years. So that is a different scenario than if we're looking at a pretty good school that needs to get better. And I thought it was worth reiterating that before we move forward on the other recommendations. To go along with that, and this is probably more in line with recommendation 1, but I'll throw it out now anyway, that signaling the need for change and signaling change through strong leadership, there are actually 2 things caught up in the same recommendation. One is the change in leadership, but the other one is signaling the need for change. And I think what we have found since the practice guide is that there is a real need for a catalytic kind of an event in a community that surrounds a school to come to the realization that we must do better for the children that we care about that are in our midst. And that tends to happen when there is a local confrontation with the brutal facts of what is going on. And the brutal facts don't just mean showing people test scores. They mean talking about this is what it means in the lives of real children as they grow into adults when they come out of schools that prepare them in this way. In other words, what happens to kids who don't finish high school? What happens to kids who leave school with very low levels of basic skills? What happens to kids who come out of schools with test scores like these, we would say, with a local community, and help people to understand we're talking about their children, their students, people they care about. So there has to be that confronting of those brutal facts, the reality of what happens in children's lives, in their adult lives when they are so poorly educated. And secondly, there has to be a vision painted to help people understand it does not have to be this way. There are schools that have demographics like ours where kids achieve at much higher levels. We can do better about these kids we care about. And then thirdly, beyond the confronting the brutal facts and seeing the vision, people need a real concrete, practical pathway to get there. So this is what we need to do tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. So that seems to be the course of action that is necessary to catalyze that community around a serious commitment to improvement for the sake of their own children and students, and to execute that in a short period of time. And because of that short period of time, well, we'll get to this later, there's a human capital element. But let's go to recommendation number 3, make visible improvements in the early improvements, which is the quick wins. Again, I think it's worth saying that quick wins do not relate directly to improved student outcomes for the most part. They are stage setters. What you're trying to affect here as much as anything is to rally a staff And those of us that have worked in schools in a situation like this know that they can be places where there is low morale, there is low expectation, where there's a sense of defeat, where there is a sense of things cannot get better here. We are not like other schools. You don't understand. You don't understand these families, these kids. We've tried it all. We've done it before. And that mentality simply has to be broken. And we can break it with cheerleading and with exaltations to folks to do better, but mostly what they have to see is concrete evidence. And so in a turnaround, we often find quick wins are an important element, and that is that typically coming from leadership, that some goals are set on a short term and are reached. And I'll tell you the kind of things we're talking about. Principals in these situations that arrive new to a school to attempt a turnaround, when they did it well, they took time to listen, to look, to immerse themselves in a real understanding of what's going on with the school. Now, not a lot of time, but they took time to do that, to do a lot of listening and thinking and examining and understanding before they created a plan, got people to buy into the plan, got people to be a part of the plan, and executed it. When they were doing this exploration, this listening and looking, typically there were certain sore points that arose. These were aggravations that people felt working in that school often. And when these principals were able to address those aggravations and fix them, that was one way to get a quick win when people would stop and look and say, gee, maybe things are different, maybe we can improve. And so the examples were the common ones that they cleaned up the school, they painted up the school, they planted some bushes, the place actually looked better. That was a practical kind of a quick win. People looked around themselves, the physical plant was improved, and they thought, gee, this isn't the same old school. Another common one was that that teachers often had legitimate complaints about scheduling and planning time, and when this was within the control of a principal, and they could change that, and they could address interruptions in instructional time, when they could give teachers more collaborative planning time, when they could make sense out of a school schedule in response to legitimate concerns from teachers, it was a quick win. It's something that could be done in a hurry with the authority of a principal. Resources. Often one quick win was that principals, when they created resource rooms where teachers could label and store and share materials and make some order out of all of that, and that was a visible sign of something concrete in the building that was different. Probably the most common quick win that was addressed, and this is particularly in high schools and probably middle schools, had to do with discipline. And often the way that a new principal could affect order and discipline was to address passing time and cafeteria time. And as we heard from more than one situation, the remedy was simply to have all adults in the hallways during passing time, and a few concrete things like that where people recognized fairly immediately, gee, it doesn't seem like the same old place the kids are, so much better behaved. So these are types of quick wins. What we know about quick wins, two things. One, they must be quick and you must win. It would be a real setback to establish a quick win goal and then to fail in meeting it. And also the quickness is necessary so that you can reverse that negativity in a school and set people onto a path for legitimate turnaround and improvement. Okay, let's move on to recommendation 4, building a committed staff. And as I said, what we know now from school improvement grants, from directions from Secretary Duncan, from the approaches that many states and districts have taken, is that to execute a turnaround, it typically is not a matter of improved professional development, because you simply can't get there quick enough. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't improve professional development, or it isn't a component. But if what I'm most interested in is rescuing students who are currently attending schools that are deserving them, the quickest way to remedy that is to change some of the adults in the building, to bring in the level of the quality of staff that I need. Now, when we did the practice guide, we were not looking at the possibility of wholesale staff replacement, the kids stay, adults go concept. So we were more looking at a more limited possibility of strategic staff replacement. But in every situation of a successful turnaround, we found there was some staff replacement. And whether that happened right away or whether it happened over the course of a year or two, there was a significant staff replacement, or at least strategic staff replacement. Let me go to the next slide here just real quick. More than, or in addition to simply replacing staff, is the question of redeploying staff, of using staff in the right places, of having the right skill sets in the building. So on this slide, you'll see at the bottom it says competence, fit, and willingness. And we found that all three were important. First of all, you need people in the building now, not in 3 years, 5 years, but now, who are competent to perform the duties that they're assigned, whatever that might be. Secondly, and this is where the commitment part came, you need people who are willing and on board with the directions that are being taken in this turnaround attempt. I think many of us learned from comprehensive school reform that in comprehensive school reform, we often took the approach, let's get a small cadre of teachers who will try the new things. And they will be so successful that everyone else will then get on board. Well, it often doesn't happen. In a school that has been demoralized and has been underperforming, sometimes when you single out the few star teachers and they try something new, they get labeled as the principal's pets or whatever. They work themselves day and night, they burn out, and other people don't necessarily get on board. So we found consistently that principals in these turnaround situations were able to get not just some, not even a critical mass, but everyone on board, or they found a way to transfer them out or to replace them. So competence and willingness are both factors. And the third factor was that in some cases you have people that are very competent, very willing, great people, good attitudes, but you simply have too many reading people and not enough math people, for example. Sometimes you have to trade people to get the skill sets that you need in the building at the time. And so that was another part of the committed, competent staff, people that are willing to work and go with you, and having the right skill sets in the building for the work that needs to be done. At this point, I'd like to turn to Phoebe Bailey, who will give us some commentary and lead into a discussion of the second two recommended practices. And then a little later, we'll be getting to Q&A, and I see a lot of great questions coming up and kind of eager to get a stab at them. So Phoebe, take it.
Hello? Hello?
Yep, go ahead, Phoebe.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. We are in southwest Arkansas, a four-county area that is primarily rural, so a lot of our schools don't have assistant SUPs or curriculum directors. So one of the things that we've taken on as a service center, we've partnered with 13 of the other service centers in the state and have worked on helping schools develop curriculum. So we took a summer and were able to do it in the summer professional development and brought in teachers that represented every grade level, so every school had buy-in, and worked with them on total instructional alignment through Lisa Carter's book and her work, and had them develop a document that had essential questions, task analysis, resources, assessment, enduring understandings. We really unpacked our standards in Arkansas. And then what they had to take back to their school, they had the prerogative of where they wanted to put that within the 9-week period. So they still have a common guide, but within their districts and within their buildings, they're having to have a conversation about which piece do we want to teach first, which piece do we want to teach second. So it still becomes their map, but that was something that we were able to help them with, that without the guidance of a curriculum coordinator or an assistant superintendent in charge of learning and instruction, that would have taken them a lot longer if they ever even got to that point. So that's how we support that. On the committed staff, we're really doing a couple of things. One of the roles that we have when we do professional development for our teachers, we also try to add in a piece for our administrators. So if we have teachers that are going through cognitively guided instruction, then we'll add a leadership piece to that so that as those principals go in the classrooms doing their observations, they'll know if the teacher is implementing that program with fidelity, if she just needs some more, if she's really trying but needs some more professional development, or if she's not even attempting at all. And if we don't give the administrators that background, then they're not going to know what to look for. So we do that piece as well as helping develop classroom walkthroughs. And on the classroom walkthroughs, we look for grade level trends. So they can see here, I'm having a problem in 6th grade math, and so they may need to look at some reassignments and moving some teachers around and possibly, moving someone from 7th grade down, or if someone has a different strength area. And we help them with their reflective conferences. So as they sit down and meet with their teachers on their findings, that's been a big piece. They've been doing their walkthroughs all along, but actually having those conversations is really kind of new for them, and we've worked through our Department of Education and actually have some model conferences that they can pull down video clips and watch and see how a reflective conference should look and what it should entail before they try to do that on their own. So that's a couple of things that are happening in Southwest Arkansas. And now Julie Barger is going to tell us what's happening in Nebraska.
Thank you, Phoebe. I represent what we call educational service units in the state of Nebraska, and we have 17 service agencies geographically located across our state. Most of them represent primarily rural schools, just as Phoebe spoke of, but we do have 2 single city service units that represent our urban areas. And we do try to work together across the state, most of us providing very similar services to our schools. And so we have very strong state organization and really try to work for equity in providing the same services across the state. In terms of Dr. Redding's recommendations and the quick wins, we have, of course, this is work that is done in schools especially, but the support that we provide happens in several ways. First of all, we do as staff developers in our service units serve on their teams, improvement teams when they are placed on the PLAS list or are looking at corrective action. We help with the grant writing so that they can secure some of that funding. So that is those 2 things are probably the big things that we try to do to help get them started. We provide services in terms of quick wins to help them seek out materials, select series. We have one thing we've seen happen in schools, although we don't have a lot to do with it, is this whole business of rearranging their schedule. Very often our elementary schools kind of depend on the high school schedule, and we really try to encourage them to invest the time and research into finding a way to make that elementary schedule independent of the high school schedule so that they can have the time that they need. We've also helped some of our schools develop community groups so that they have input and support from the community. Another one, though, that I think is probably the most important one is really just helping schools analyze their data and finding out, and I think this goes with both the third and the fourth recommendation, for building a committed staff and also for a quick win. Sometimes I don't think staff members always know what the data looks like. And as Sam indicated, there's 3 different users of data in a district if it's being run well. And sometimes the teachers, I don't think, have the opportunity to really look at the data and understand the situation and understand maybe why they're where they are in terms of achievement. And so just analyzing that data and then really digging into it to find out the subgroups that might really be low achieving, and then really working to develop strategies for that. And while that is a long-term piece, it's also, I think, just that understanding piece can be a quick win for them to just develop that understanding. As a service agency, we provide support for that on a individual school basis, whether it be curriculum mapping, whether it's the data analysis. Some of you spoke of having that the walkthroughs. We provide support for that as well. And then, of course, we even have some instances where we've gone in and helped with instructional coaching, which can sometimes be a quick win, too, for a teacher if they just need a little support. So in terms of building that committed staff, one thing that we have done for years and are continuing to do is to provide leadership mentoring programs for both our superintendents and our principals. And by doing this, I think we are supporting the leadership that in turn helps build that committed staff. We really work to try with districts to help them find release time for those teachers to analyze that data, to implement formative assessment, and then again have time to work in teams to analyze that data and to talk about instructional strategy changes and so forth. We really work with districts to help build professional learning groups. We work with districts to try to help them develop team teaching opportunities, all of those kinds of things that kind of build some camaraderie, build support for one another in the district, and help them become really committed, I think, to the whole business of trying to improve. The other thing I think that service agencies can do and that we really try to do for building a committed staff is to help them realize that this is just, while it seems like punishment and maybe in a way is, it's also an opportunity for them to improve, and one that if the grants are written, there is some funding to help support them. And so I think service agencies, we have a saying in our area, service is our middle name, and so I think we really focus on trying to serve schools in any way that we can and providing them with the research, the ideas that have research behind them that will really help them. And so appreciate this opportunity to be able to share what we're doing, and I really appreciate the audience for having the interest in trying to improve education for all children in this country. The next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Myra Monroe, and she is from the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators. And so let's see what Myra has to share.
Thanks, Julie. Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to begin with the theory of action, which details our instructional support model as part of the Michigan Association for Intermediate School Administrators and our partnership with the Michigan Department of Education as we serve schools statewide. And so our theory of action has 3 key components, and it's data-driven decision-making, which many have already spoken to about root cause analysis. We also have, which leads into evidence-based interventions, and then instructional coaching to support the implementation of that chosen intervention for fidelity. And so as part of our services, we have data coaches who can assist schools. We have evidence-based intervention facilitators who can assist with the investigation and selection process to match that root cause. And then, as mentioned, we have instructional coaching in the areas of English language arts and mathematics to assist with that area of adequate yearly progress. And what I would like to do in the next few minutes is speak about what the schools are doing with that. And so I'm going to highlight one school in particular, and that's Battle Creek Learning Center, and they happen to be an alternative high school as part of Calhoun Community Schools. And they have chosen to implement the Turning Around Low Performing Schools Practice Guide in its entirety, as Dr. Redding kind of talked about, as their intervention for changing the trajectory of the students that they serve. So more specifically, in the area of visible improvement, this staff, Battle Creek Learning Center, they have 3 coaches currently. They have an ELA coach, they have a math coach, and also a leadership coach. And they're in the building 2 to 3 days per week. They also have already in place, and kudos to the staff for having, is a professional development model that is quite creative in that they already have 3 half-day sessions a month that does not take away time from students in their instruction. So it was already in place, and the coaches are able, as outside facilitators, to come in and engage staff and coach staff in ongoing, job-embedded, team learning that's very explicit, it's systematic, and it's focused on specific instructional strategies for quick results. All of the coaches have partnership agreements with staff members that hold everyone accountable to each other and to the results that they seek. And lastly, another quick win is that they were able to create a resource room through a wish list that is focused on each of the recommendations from the Turning Around Low Performing Schools Practice Guide, as well as in their area of proficiency in either ELA or math and the instructional strategies that they are using. So that's a little bit about the visible improvements. As far as building a committed staff, Dr. Redding talked about how all of these pieces interrelate, and so you'll see some connections here as well. One of the pieces that Michigan has, like many other states, is we need to have school improvement teams or that continuous school improvement cycle. And so the team, the staff, had a rubric, and they chose the leadership team that way. So there's shared leadership within the building. They have, as mentioned, there's targeted professional development through coaching that focuses on increasing the capacity of the staff through their strengths and then also the very unique needs of the students that they serve. Another highlight is that they have high expectations for each other, for accountability to each other, for student achievement, and the staff acknowledge those challenges of who they are as an alternative high school, yet they don't see these as obstacles to their success. So that helps in that committed and commitment to each other. They have had opportunities for collaboration to develop unit designs that can align with their instructional strategies, which kind of, goes back to the instruction, which is the second recommendation, as well as those quick wins. And lastly, I think what I'd like to highlight is that the building principal, as an instructional leader, has been visible in all of the professional development, and that increases that shared common understandings as well as support. So those are just some highlights of Battle Creek Learning Center and their commitment to each other and to the students that they serve. So Brian, I'm actually going to turn it back to you to facilitate the next portion.
Okay, well, I appreciate the response to the panels, and you can see the exciting work that is going on all around the country. With that, I will take a couple of questions at this time, and I would like to start. The first question that I have that was submitted is a couple of you have spoken about root cause analysis. Can you provide some examples of what schools have been able to uncover as root causes? Have the schools ever uncovered causes that are less related to specific learning processes and more related to the things like racial tensions or low expectations or non-academic conditions that impact achievement? Sam, you want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I don't know if I do or not. That's kind of a tough one, Brian. I thought you were assigned to that.
Oh, I just looked at that. I read the top one. I'm with you. I got it. Go ahead.
You want it?
This is Linda, and I certainly can do that.
Linda, go for it.
Go for it.
Because I'm going to say, yes, absolutely, there are those reasons, some of them that you mentioned. One can be the discipline in the school, that the teachers are not able to actually teach what they need to teach because there's really not good policies, procedures, and effective plans for managing student behavior in place. So that absolutely can be a root cause. A second, and I did mention this, is that the curriculum that the schools are using could be antiquated and may not be aligned to, in our case, the standards, the Pennsylvania state standards, which then are aligned to the state assessment test. So it really, and particularly I'm going to mention this, science is relatively new. And when science testing came about throughout our Commonwealth, we really had to make adjustments in what courses were taught when, because students either were not being introduced or reinforced in specific topics that were being assessed. And so significant changes really needed to be made there. So that's a couple examples that I'm very familiar with and certainly are prevalent.
I jump in to say this because the whole notion of the culture of a school and the prevailing attitudes primarily of the people who work in that school are significant to enabling the kind of instructional changes that you need to produce results. And I think there is a relationship between those prevailing attitudes in that school culture often. But there's a relationship between that and how those people in that school perceive that community around them. And I think you're getting at that a little bit with this question. The problem becomes, I think, convincing those people in the building that they're the ones that have to change to be more effective in what they do with those children that come from the community, not that the community has to change. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a role for engaging parents and community and all of that. But mostly what we have to change are the attitudes and expectations of those inside the building. And so I think there is that overlay of perceptions by people in the building of that community that surrounds them that is an obstacle to achieving a turnaround until you get it moving in the right direction.
I think the advantage we now have, this is Linda, is that there are grade level standards, though. So it doesn't matter whether you are in a poor, wealthy, low-performing, high-performing. The challenge that many of the low-performing schools have, though, as you advance through the grade levels, if you're at 8th grade and you're behind, how do you catch up? And here in Pennsylvania, we look at eligible content so that we might not be addressing everything, but that's the mechanism used to try to get those kids caught up so they can get to grade level a little quicker.
Yeah, this is Brian. I just add that when we start dealing with those root causes, the identification is critical, but we also have to be careful that they don't become excuses, especially for staff, and we've got to get in and do something about it. And I'm very sensitive to that because some of the issues in the question cause some people to step back away, and they shouldn't. You've got to push forward.
Hi, this is Chris Donnelly in Iowa, and I would just address the portion of the question that asked about non-academic conditions that impact achievement. In Iowa, each AEA partners with our Department of Ed to provide a school-wide program focused on improving conditions for learning, and the label given to that work is called Positive Behavioral Supports, and it mirrors a professional development building-wide instead of focusing on academics, but it focuses on the conditions that need to exist within the building, physical conditions, rules, and also attitudes of the adults in the building, so students can realize academic success. And that is another structure our AEAs do provide to schools. If schools choose that sort of professional development opportunity, the staff do all have to agree and commit to participating in that, and then we do provide consultants to lead the professional development, but also on-site consultants to ensure implementation that is aligned with fidelity. So that doesn't certainly address all the components of that question, but it is something in Iowa that we are working on with respect to non-academic conditions that impede student learning.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. When is the best time during the school year to provide leadership training to administrators for change? Should instructional change occur, one, in the initiative at a time such as reading comprehension, or should changes occur with reading comprehension, math problem solving, science, and social studies, all at the same time for chronically impaired schools? Sam, that one's directed to you.
Let me take it in parts because I think a lot of us realize that particularly if you're bringing in new leadership to lead a turnaround, it seems like the ideal would be to identify those people. I know this can be awkward, but to identify those people in the spring of the year where they actually have a chance to get to know something about that school before they would actually take over during the summer to lead the changes in the fall. And I say it for a couple of reasons. One is because we noticed in these turnaround leaders, while there is strong leadership there was also a strong ability and inclination on the front end to really become personally to personally absorb all the information they could about that school. I mean, these were people that would talk to cafeteria staff. They would look at schedules. They would know the backgrounds on teachers. They'd look at student data. I mean, they took all that into account before rushing to judgment in terms of here's my plan, and they also engaged people in the plan. The problem is that can't go on forever. We kind of need a point in time in which it's that signal change. Now this is a different school, and here is how it's going to be different. It's often easiest for that change to come at the beginning of a new school year, so it's very noticeable when school starts. So it seems like the ideal would be to identify these people in the spring. They could go through that fact-finding and, as you said here, that leadership training and that through the summer, so they were prepared for the beginning of a school year. The question about the individual initiatives, I think addressing this as getting better at the specifics of individual initiatives like reading comprehension and so forth, that's kind of a school improvement approach. And maybe that comes step two, because step one is in a turnaround school. If you're talking about the bottom 5% or anything close to that, you've kind of get everybody more immediately up to a floor level of performance that, and I think we know what that means. There's certain rudiments of good instruction and effective practice and good leadership that kind of go across the board regardless of subject matter. And typically in a turnaround situation, that's where we got to strike first, get everybody up to that floor level, and then you can start working on the professional development and the specifics of the what the question calls the initiatives of the more specifics of subject area and instructional strategies.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, SEAs and ESAs are all structured very differently, some with more capacity to support low-performing schools and districts and some with less. What do SEAs and ESAs have to do generally to be better position themselves to offer this support, i.e. the structural changes, human capital building, partnering with external organizations, etc.? And that one, somebody's picking on me, is definitely addressed to me. So let me give you a national perspective and some of the other folks from the ESA may want to weigh in, but I'm seeing a huge effort regarding the leveraging of our limited resources by working together to build up this type of capacity. If we're talking about structural changes, many of the states are working on developing a system of ESAs that aligns with the efforts of the State Department of Education, which in turn is aligned to the needs of the local district, schools, local districts, and in the schools. And that's not a top-down model. It's a new approach that takes all the players and puts them together, and they work it together to do that alignment. The issue on human capital is absolutely huge, and it's an area where ESAs are working, again, to leverage this human capital. They're sharing the strengths that they have across ESA boundaries, so that if they have one regional service agency may be doing a super job in the math science area while another one's concentrating on reading, they're trading this expertise across regional boundaries. I'm seeing these boundaries disappearing. Of course, the partnering part of the question, that's what ESAs really do extremely well, is bringing different entities, both in the private and the public sector, together to link together to help turn around low-performing schools and just general school improvement. So with that, I would just throw it out there in case somebody from one of the other service agencies around the country want to respond to that question.
I would respond to that. I think it varies from state to state, the relationship that the service agencies have with their Department of Education, but I also think, like you say, Brian, that they're really trying to work together, because I think Departments of Education are realizing that the best vehicle they have for reaching schools is probably through their service agencies. I would also say that they're crossing boundaries as well, like you spoke of. I think a lot of it has to do with how the service agencies are funded in states. If they are on a private pay kind of system, then they're probably a little, where schools contract with them for services, then they're probably a little less generous with their sharing of information. But if they are funded with tax dollars and really aren't in this for a for-profit business, then I think they're much more likely to share information. I know in Nebraska we have a very strong statewide organization for our service units and for the departments within them. And we do cross boundaries like you're speaking of. So hopefully as we try to serve schools in the future, we'll see more of that crossing of boundaries and sharing of information.
I wanted to chime in too. This is Damon Douglas in Massachusetts. I agree about the crossing boundaries, and I think part of that is made possible by people here viewing the terrain as more one that needs cooperation and collaboration instead of competition. And that's a changing way of thinking here, I think. And then another factor here in Massachusetts, and this takes time, is building relational trust between folks in the state education agency and here at our ESA.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question, Sam. Do you think it is critical that the new leader be trained first as a turnaround leader?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question, because it looks like what it takes to be a successful turnaround leader has maybe three components, and one of which is that they know their stuff in terms of knowing the research, instructional research, change research, school operations. So they have that good foundation of understanding of research. And secondly is that they have exhibited the management skills of being able to be a good organizer and leader and all of that. And some of that they can be trained in. The third element, though, is one that seems to be something apart from how they are trained, and that is what some are calling a core competency. But it's almost a matter of mindset and personality and kind of approach to the world, in that these successful turnaround leaders, while they do have the knowledge base, while they do have the experience and the skills, there's something about them that makes them inclined to accept personal responsibility, to not externalize causation, and that makes them relentless in this pursuit, that enables them to engage other people and get them on board. So that there seems to be a lot of factors there that have more to do with selecting the right person than they do to taking anyone and training them. And certainly you get the best results if you had all three: the person who had the right knowledge base, who was well trained and had the skills, and also had that core personal competencies to lead a turnaround. These are often very difficult, demanding jobs, and so it seems to be a matter of personal characteristics as well. So I would add that caveat.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question, another question here. The recommendations that have been made seem to make a lot of sense for turning schools around. However, the level of evidence is measured as low. If this is the case, why implement the recommendation? What type of recommendation is measured as high? Sam, would you take a shot at that one?
Yeah, I tried to explain that a little on the front end, but low evidence does not mean that there's not accuracy to the practice. What it means is there doesn't exist a body of research that was conducted with a high standard of research design. In other words, no one was doing randomized controlled studies of specific practices and interventions to see if what kind of effect they got in achieving a turnaround. So what we have are case studies that mostly describe what happened in a turnaround. That doesn't mean they're not accurate. It doesn't mean we can't draw conclusions and generalize from them, but it means that they don't bear with them the statistical validity of a more rigorous research design. So what we did as a panel was to say, first of all, it's got to be present in the research that we have. The practice has to be present there in terms of the case studies, and also kind of has to pass the reality test of what we might know from experience and so forth. And thirdly, as I said, we will put forth recommendations that would seem to do no harm. In other words, I think you're right. If you look at these 4 recommendations, if anything, they are too weak in thinking they're really going to lead to a significant improvement in a short period of time for a bottom 5% of schools or something like that. They come closer to just being good school improvement practices, with the exception probably of the quick wins and some of the recommendations on that signaling of a point-in-time departure or signaling change.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I have a question here for you. Would you agree that the role of the state is to assist the school with expertise and strategy, but the work has to be owned by the school and the district?
Well, I agree with the second part, that the work has to be owned by the school and the district. And in Iowa, our state-level educational department provides certain opportunities for schools to engage in, and then our role as an AEA is to help districts if they choose to select those processes. So our schools have a lot of opportunity to choose from different statewide initiatives. But we do work with the schools to make sure that what they're selecting from will directly address their student learning needs based on the data of the districts, and also help the districts to know whether or not they have the infrastructure they need to begin to implement the level of change that they are looking to implement. So it clearly is the school who, from our perspective, initiates what it is they think they need to be involved in.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do now is turn the discussion back over to Sam, and then if we have additional time at the end, we'll take a few more questions. Hey, Dr. Redding, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'll wrap up a few things here, and I think it would be good to give them another shot at questions if we have a chance. I have a couple thoughts at the end, and let me see if I can get my slide somehow. I'm now back to the beginning slide. Just a second here, folks.
Hey, Rose.
Okay. I thought maybe we ought to hit upon, probably most people are aware, but the school improvement grants that all states are now implementing with schools, and this is the attempt to get at that bottom 5% and to use turnaround methodology. Turnaround as an intervention model under this program has a very specific meaning, and it's one of 4 intervention models. I thought I would touch upon that quickly at the end, and then see if we have some other questions that might prompt. Under the intervention models in the school improvement grants, the turnaround means that the staff of the school is basically dismissed and not more than half of them are reemployed. So it's a real heavy emphasis on the human capital equation, that building committed staff. And with all of the school improvement interventions, the emphasis really, as I said, it's more on rescuing kids than it is how do you gradually improve a school. The other 3 intervention models, the transformation, which is probably what we call the mildest, requires, except in certain circumstances, a replacement of the principal, and then a very rigorous staff evaluation process so that decisions about human capital personnel can be made over the period of a year or 2 while not made so abruptly up front, and that there's also dramatic change in culture and practice. And the other intervention models would be the restart, where basically the school is closed and it's a charter school is formed, so it's now outside the management of the district, or the district contracts with an educational management organization to manage the school. So again, management is removed from the district. It's like a new school. It can start with new staff. It can take a whole new direction. And finally, the intervention model is to close the school. And while this may sound harsh, again, the point of the turnarounds at this extreme of the pyramid, this 5% or wherever you want to draw the line, is more on rescuing students than it is on ultimately how do we make this a better school. And in some cases, if you don't think you can get there with transformation, turnaround, or restart, then the ethical thing to do is simply send students to better schools. So this is turnaround now with a definition that's much sharper than it was when we look at it for the practice guide 4 years ago, and I think it's fair for people to keep that in mind as they're using the term in this day and age. So with that, I will be quiet and see if anyone has questions.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. Julie, to what extent is the assistance optional for these schools? What strategies do presenters have for engaging those that may be hesitant or resistant to embrace the assistance that is offered? Also, is there any way you can post the questions on the PowerPoint as you ask them so we can see them?
Okay, well, I think I can respond to the first 2 possibly, but maybe not the last one. In terms of optional assistance, I think in terms of service agencies, most of us are in the position where our assistance certainly is optional. I don't think a lot of us are maybe set up like the one in Pittsburgh where we would go in and manage a school, so to speak. But I think one of in terms of strategies to help to be able to get in the door and to be able to provide that assistance to them, it's all about relationship building and having them trust the work that we do, have them realize that we are there not in a regulatory capacity, but as in an assistance capacity, and to really try to work closely between the Department of Education and the schools to kind of serve as a liaison so that, we have support from them, but then the schools also trust us. I think that is, when we hire people for presenters in our service agency, that that relationship factor and being an engaging presenter in and of itself is something that we really, really look for. We have districts that are resistant. I don't think you can be 100% on any of that, but we worked as hard as we can.
Okay, thank you. With that, we've got some polling that we need to do, and we also have a survey to complete. So Susan or Heather, who's going to handle that part of our presentation?
Thanks, Brian. This is Heather Hoke, and I am going to right now push a poll out to the audience that has to do with what you might like to hear in future webinars if the REL program and AESA were able to put on future webinars. So just take a moment and answer the question, and then I will push the poll results out in just a moment. Okay, great. That was fast. That's kind of fun to do. You can see that there's a lot of interest in the top three, but it looks like the most interest is in the one about using data, so that's great to see. In a moment, I'm also going to push out the our survey that if you could take a moment to fill out now. You'll also receive it in an email from us, just evaluating the event and letting us know how it went and what you thought about it. We would really appreciate that. And with that, I think we'd like to thank all our panelists, Brian Talbot, Sam Redding, and all of you participants out there in the internet space for joining us. And several of you asked about whether this is going to be archived, and it will be. And you will receive an email with all that information, and we will have the PowerPoint, all the questions, the link to the practice guide if you need that again, and information on the Doing What Work site, and all of that information available for you very shortly after we conclude this webinar. Does anyone else have anything else to add before we close out?
This is Brian. I think we didn't get to all the questions, and my understanding is, Heather, that we'll try and get those to the appropriate people and get a response to them.
Yes, that is correct. We will get your questions answered, and we will also include all the questions with the archived information. But yes, the specific questions we will answer.
And I also want to thank everybody for their participation, and a special thanks to McREL and the other labs, because without your leadership and coordination, we could not have pulled this event off. We just really appreciate it, Heather.
Yes, thank you, and also to you, Brian, and Peter Young over there. He helped quite a bit. And Sam, thank you so much for your time today. It was, a great event, and again, the panelists, thank you as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good afternoon.